Round two of the um, Grand Prix, the FIDE Grand Prix. And this game is between GM Richard Rapport and GM Maxime Vachier Lagrave. Let's go. B3. What else from Richard Rapport? This leads us. This is a so-called Nimzo-Larsen attack, and usually is related to these bird opening variations. You know, you can get these type of setups where the bishop goes here, knight seeks to control e5. It's basically a dark square. You know, I'll just make some random moves. It's basically a dark square game where white is focusing in the opening on the control of the dark squares, and then the bird's opening in particular. Usually white is trying to engineer himself to castle on the queen side. So let me make some more random moves. Knight f6, b2. I just throw that there. Actually, yeah, like h3, something like that. And again, I'm just trying to illustrate a point here. And of course, this is all long-winded, but usually one of the objectives in the bird's opening is to wind up with the setup that is engineered at total destruction of the black king side. And again, I made some random moves. White is probably busted in his position and didn't really check, but I just wanted you to see like a sample position to illustrate the ideas. These rooks will come over to the king side, and white is bent on destruction of the black king, utilizing the dark squares in the beginning. And a famous game to use for an example is Lasker versus Bauer. That's the famous game with the double bishop sacrifice on g7 and h7. And that's basically the model play in the birds proper. Okay, now the bird is also related to the Dutch defense, and play is a bit different there. So since this opening ended up in the birds, I just wanted to give you that brief outline. And also, for further information on the structure with b3 and f4, look at my video Grandmasters versus the birds opening. You'll see how the Grandmasters deal with it from both sides. So right now we're going to look at this game where Rapport began with b3, which was one of Bent Larsen's pet openings. Back in the days, it's not known to be harmful for black, but black, has to be aware because white is a specialist in this setup. Also, GM Jabava plays this opening also, and black can equalize, but hey, if you're a specialist in the opening, you're very familiar with the position, and that goes a long way in chess also. The chess psychology, the fact that you're more comfortable than your opponent in the position, can often lead to some interesting outcomes. But here, Richard Rapport is dealing with the 2,800 player, top 10 in the world. So he might have to do a little better than this in the future. So after d5, just a normal move, right? Taking claim in the center, bishop b2. And when I say normal move, it's because after b3, it's so flexible that black can do any kind of setup that he wants to do. Knight f6, e6, d6, d5, e5, c5 if he wants. Whatever you're comfortable with, you can do that. So it's super flexible. As opposed, and I want to say that too, is B3 is more flexible because you can hide your intentions more than say just doing F4 right away. Okay, moving on. So B3, D5, bishop B2. All right. Notice the F pawn has not moved yet. Bishop G4. So this might look like a strange move. Now again, referring back to my video, Grandmasters versus the Birds opening. Sometimes the Birds opening after F4 can wind up in let me just go back for illustrations. Please bear with me. Sometimes after the Birds opening is played, the game can evolve into a Dutch defense, a reverse Dutch defense, that is. And say after F5, D5, and let's just say G3. So let's say white wants to play a Leningrad with colors in reverse, Leningrad Dutch. Bishop G5, excuse me, Bishop G4. And all this is a reverse anti-Dutch system. If you are familiar with your chess openings, after D5, D4, F5, this is very common in the Dutch defense. Right? It's an annoying system where a lot of times white will chop this off right away, and you get these type of systems, and they can be very annoying for black. This long-term pressure, you get these type of setups, right? More pressure there, and then what happens? Let's just say castle for argument's sake. After knight BD2, castle, and then what happens is white winds up castling queenside, and then he starts chipping away at these pawns, the weakness on the king side. And there's many grandmaster games in these lines. So all you're seeing right here with that early bishop G4 is, let's go back a little. All you're seeing with that early bishop G4, of course, when I switch back to the main position, is you're basically seeing an anti-Dutch system in reverse. So Vachier Lagrave is kind of anticipating that this is the best that white can pretty much extract from the position. He's anticipating the knight coming to F3 at some point. And it's interesting because white has the extra tempo, but it's well known theoretically that the extra tempo isn't always good. It used to be thought that, hey, if I can play this system with the extra move in hand, it'll be good. But practice has shown that the extra tempo is sometimes detrimental because you give too much information to the opponent that he can use. For example, Richard Reddy, the great master, tried the Alicon defense in reverse by playing G3, and after the E5, then he would go and play knight F3. But this extra tempo, proved to be, pretty much useless, at this point. So it's been tried before. Let's get back to the game. I just wanted to lay that foundation for you. So B3, D5, bishop B2, and there's bishop G4. So you can have some kind of explanation, some kind of understanding, to this random looking move. Besides that it's kind of an anti-Dutch play in reverse, the obvious part of it is that it prevents, D3, and many times in these openings, the move D3 followed by bringing the bishop out to sometimes harass this knight that's on C6 is possible. Okay, so again, it's an inconvenient move, and it forces white to commit, right? And H3, and now D3 is played. Knight D7, preparing E5. Again, one more time, just so you're not freaked out. Let us just say, for example, in the mainline Dutch, I'm sorry, let's go back. D4 F5, right? So you're playing a Leningrad player, and sometimes you will get these kind of lines, the H6, and notice the weakness on this diagonal. So for instance, at the H6, E3 is played many times, sometimes E4 for the enterprising player. I'm sorry, forgive me. The bishop G5. Get this type of setups. Hold on, I'm forgetting my theory. This is what happens when you go off the top of your head. So D4, F5. Let's see. Let's say bishop G5 just for an example. And let's just make like a random move here. Okay. Not even that move works. Okay, let's play knight C6. Basically, I'm trying to keep this diagonal weak. Okay, so E3, and let's say, for example, H6. Then you have, of course, this mate here after queen H5 and G6. Okay, but the themes are the same. Notice the H6 attacking the bishop, weakening the king side. So let's get back to the position. So again, we see the same ideas. H6, excuse me, H3 is played. The bishop drops back. D3. And remember what I said. White's games concentrate in the opening on the dark control of the dark squares. G4. There it is, just as I had explained to you with the colors reversed. Driving the bishop back. F4 again. And now we have a Dutch defense and reverse, but like an anti-Dutch system played by black. This is like a Leningrad position. E6. And now the knight comes to F3. So white preserves the integrity of his pawn structure. His knight gets to come out, but he had weakened his king side, and primarily the dark squares. He must be very careful. Note how many pawns are on light squares. All of these dark squares are weak and will have to be defended by pieces. All right, and that's a tough task. Okay, so the plus for white is he has gained some space in the position on the king side. Vachier Lagrave has to be careful, of course, not to get his bishop trapped and things of that nature. And we see the plan with the concentration on the dark squares. All right, so we see white sticking to a plan here. H5, already probing the weakness that was created by the early advance of these pawns. Okay, the idea, of course, is H takes G4. You have the rooks opposing each other. This rook on H1 is unprotected. So, Rapport has to address that issue. He advances G5. Now, this is a plus for black. The reason why is because normally, again, and I'm not going to show you the colors reversed again, but normally in a Dutch, one of the main ideas is to attack on the king side. Now, in order for you to be able to attack successfully in that sector of the board, you have to have the option to open a position. You might not want it open right now, but you want the position to open up there at some point. This move G5 kind of shuts black's options, shuts white's options down on that sector of the board, and it could be safe for black to actually castle over there at one point. All right. So what this means is now that the pawns are fixed, because I always speak about Nimzo-Larsen. He talks about restraining the pawns, blockading them, and then attacking them and winning them. So we see that happening now with the king side pawns of white. They've been restrained, they're slowed down, and they really can't move now. That means that they become liabilities, because now they just have to be protected. They're no longer a useful attacking force, and now they have to be protected by pieces. This is a net positive for black. Once the pawns, Max Erver said, who defeated Alakhan or Alekhine, as some people pronounce it, for the world championship in 1935. What he said in his fantastic book, The Middle Game, is referring to flank pawns on the queen side or king side. Is that once he was talking about majorities, but he said once these pawns, for any reason, become immobile, they immediately the opponent's game usually is becomes better. Okay, those because once those pawns are immobilized, that's when they become liabilities. They're no longer attacking units, and we see that happen to Rapports king side pawns here. And watch them as the game goes on. So they first they get stopped. All right. Still exercising a lot of pressure on this diagonal, however. So difficult right now for black to bring his king side pieces out, and this is an issue that he has to deal with. However, with the position closed, right, the time element is not a factor. Okay, it's not as great of a factor as it would be in an open game. Remember this. So the knight comes out to e7, and that knight is going right to f5. That's the ideal square for the knight. Okay, knight h4. This is a move you will see a lot. Very strong move by Maxime Vachier Lagrave. He's not worried about this move, knight takes g6, for the reasons that I stated earlier about the fixation of the pawns. This actually makes white's position, makes black's position, you know, pretty strong and safe on the king side, because now pair of pieces is traded. This bishop will come out, because now this knight is guarding the g7 square, and it's safe for black to even castle over there if he wishes. All right. I was thinking about this during the game, actually, because this is like the most natural move, is to damage the pawn structure, get the bishop pair, and then play e4. Right? But I was looking, and I just felt that black was just fine after this. You know, this knight just hanging out here like that. And again, there's no outpost for it, so I mean, it can be attacked. But this is as far as I really looked at it, and I was like, okay, black should be okay. You know, maybe bishop c5 or something. And then when the you know, this guy has to go, so bishop c1, and then you just take. And I just felt, you know, that Richard Rapport had nothing here. So he played knight takes f5, which is respectable. Bishop takes f5. Again, this bishop outside the pawn chain is, you know, reminiscent of a good version of the Caro-Kann, except this pawn is not on c6. But often in the Caro-Kann, you'll see this type of setup. And in the Slav, also, again, the pawn is on c7. But you can use some of the you know, some of that positional memory if you play those openings here. So bishop takes f5 was played. Bishop g2 and e5. e5 is a good move because of the instability of this pawn right here on g5. So for instance, if f takes e5, then queen takes g5. Attacking this guy. Okay, bishop takes d5, c6, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back. Bishop b4. And again, this is just exploiting a weakness on the dark squares. It's just too much going on the dark squares. Right? c3. Here. Here. Right? And then boom. And that's usually what happens when you have a lot of weakness. It's a tactical blow. The idea is if d takes c5, rook d8, hitting the queen, and then then where's the queen going? Right? Can't go there. Queen takes c1. Can't go there. Bishop takes c2. All right. So that's the only move. Black wins. So e5, striking in the center. Good move by Rapport, because he doesn't want to take. So he plays the next best move, and again he's trying to continue with his plan of developing and getting over here. The king. He takes f4, and now queen takes f4. So now we have this attack on the bishop, and there's an attack here. Good move by Vachier Lagrave. Just bishop e6. Knight d2. Just dealing with the, again, continuing on with this plan. However, the queen becomes a target. That's a real obvious move. Bishop d6. The queen stays there to keep an eye on the g5 pawn. Knight e5. And now we see black's control of the center is starting to tell, because now he crosses white's plans of dominating on the dark squares. Now we see that black is starting to infringe upon that. Knight f3. Knight g6. Right? Maintaining control of the dark squares. That's what the fight is about. So white spent this whole opening concentrating on these dark squares. So if he loses control of the dark squares, his game will be worse. It's like investing in the business, and then the business goes under. Like investing everything you got into that enterprise, and then the enterprise doesn't work out. Then you go into dire straits, and that's why Richard Rapport is fighting so hard. He's opened up with b3, bishop b2. Flung his pawns up on the king side, played knight f3. This is all about getting control of those dark squares, and then if he loses control of that, his game goes down the drain. So it's very critical. This is a critical point right now, because Vachier Lagrave is now contesting the dark squares. Check. Bishop d7. Queen d4. I don't like this move. All of this moving around with the queen in an opening like that, because it just becomes a target. And usually when something does look suspicious like these moves, tactical blows are usually available. This is how my mind is programmed. Like when I look at a position and I see a lot of awkward looking stuff, I think tactical blow. It must be somewhere on the board. So even though this is being attacked right here, it just doesn't look right. The move queen g5, I'm sorry, queen h5, that was played earlier. Rather, queen h4, I'm sorry. Just all these queen moves. Queen takes f4, queen h4, and now queen d4, just going pawn grabbing. Doesn't seem right to me. c5 by Lagrave, again, crossing the plan of the fight on the dark squares. And this is what's critical. This pawn is not critical. What's critical is the fight for the dark squares and the center and the opening. And we see that black has taken over now. Right? These are black squares now. Okay? E4 is still contested, but D4 has been taken over. D4 has been captured. E5 is still contested. Okay, but D4 has been captured. Queen E3. Another suspicious looking move. But again, he's sticking with his plan, fighting with all his might for these dark squares. King steps to the side. F8. I like this move. Although, again, black has some troubles developing his king side, the position is still relatively close, so he has time. And black's plan is real simple. Is march over with the king in the safety. And remember what I told you about earlier, with these pawns being advanced, and after h4 and g5, one of black's plans is to try to open up on the king side. Well, he's advanced his plan pawns too early and has committed. So therefore, he's not, it's safe for black on the king side. So black's plan's real simple. King G8, King H7, take this rook on H8 and bring it right here and hit white right in the face with the rook. So he decides to castle king side himself, creating this opposition, right, with the rook on F1 and the pawn on F7. Queen C7, good move again, fighting for the dark squares. See, he's crossing white's plan every chance he gets. Not only is he doing that, but the threat is just to play rook to E8. Okay, that's a good anticipatory move. Queen D2, he knows the rook is coming. And at some point he hopes to play E4. No brainer, rook E8. So E3 instead. King G8, continuing with the plan that I mentioned before. Got to get this guy into the game on H8. And now D4. Again, just trying to stick to the game plan, fighting for the dark squares. Good move. Threat. Now you're going to drop a pawn here. H4, another pawn move. Getting rid of a defender, the king side. Bishop takes E5. D takes E5. Bishop takes G2. Queen G2. And Vachier goes in for Queen G4. He could have played this move if he wanted to. I don't see how white would have been able to really solve his problems. Got to protect this, right? And it seems like Rapport is in trouble to me in this type of scenario. Okay. So anyway, he offers Rapport a bad endgame. After all, white has these awful double pawns in the middle. This pawn is under pressure from this knight, right? So why not offer the ending? Rook A D1. Knight takes H4. Queens are forced off the board. H takes G4. Rook takes D5. And we can assess this ending as being better for white. Now, also what's interesting is black has an open file already for the rook, and he can choose to keep it there if he desires. White also has these double pawns, which are horrible. The G5 pawn is weak. Black, on the other hand, has a weak G4 pawn. This pawn on A5, on C5 can be protected by B6. Check. And this is what I was talking about. So the rook did not have to do anything. So he actually is already developed on the H file. So he comes to the second rank and he starts snatching material. Notice he protects this pawn and threatens the bishop here. He's willing to part ways with this pawn, however. Rook F2 is important, of course. Really no time to take this, because instead of just trading pieces after, say, rook takes B2, which would be an error, and rook takes F3, what happens is knight H2, the fork. Therefore, Rapport plays rook F2, trades the rooks, and he decides to take on G5 as opposed to trying to protect this with say b6. And then white could have opted to sacrifice this pawn right here, and then give black these tripled pawns, where it'd be more difficult for him to win the game. So he just takes here. And the idea here is the same thing again. Right? Bad pieces. Bad piece placement leads to combinations. So if he takes here, you got a fork. Okay? And sometimes you might be in games and it seems like your opponent's pieces are all just in the right places, or your pieces are just not in the right places. And that's what happens, is bad piece placement usually leads to combinative not usually, does lead to combinative opportunities for you or your opponent. And that's what it is right here, is Rapports' pieces are not optimally placed, and it has a lot of weakness in the position. So knight takes g5, king g3, going after this pawn. Knight e6. So he protects the pawn that's more valuable. This pawn is weaker of the two, right? The g4 pawn is weaker. He says, okay, take that one. Rook d7, going to the second rank. Again, the common theme you will see in Grandmaster games is the patience, right? He could have just grabbed this pawn real quick, but he knows that pawn on g4 is weak, so he improves the position. It's a good thing to remember. Always try to improve the position. Don't always be eager to grab the material, because on king takes g4, then Vachier Lagrave, takes a big step towards winning the game by simplification. This is why Rapport goes here and attacks. Now, on rook d8, right, he can take. Now, he's still, still in a bad position, but at least he gets some activity here. For example, and that's why he wasn't eager to try and just take the pawn on g4. So rook d7, rook d8, and here's the line that we just looked at. Okay, and now it's just a matter of just chasing the weaknesses around the board. I like this part of the game right here, because Vachier Lagrave forces Richard Rapport to basically bind himself up. So after bishop c1, protecting his pawn, now he attacks the bishop. Now there's really only three moves here. One is rook a1, which rook c3 is pretty strong. There's really no way to defend this pawn and the bishop on c1. The other move I remember seeing during the game, of course, is bishop a3. Again, rook c3 with the same, kind of threats against the b and e pawns. And then the other one was rook a8 check, which basically buys a move. Okay, there's this move. It basically buys a move, but the dynamics of the position don't change. In other words, the king goes, to the h file, but this bishop still has to be protected. So rook a1 will be forced pretty much next move. Instead, Richard played rook a1. And again, it's hard to defend these pawns here. Okay. Bishop is totally shut down. And the rook is shut down because it has to defend his little brother. King takes g4. And now the material starts getting gobbled up. King h7. This pawn is attacked, but the bishop is worth more. So, okay, so he decides, hey, I'm going to take this pawn, and then I'm going to grab that knight afterwards. Good move. Check. Again, notice the patience. Now he grabs a piece. Let's go back, because I know some of you are like, what? Let's look at it. First of all, rook takes f7. Okay? Again, not the thirsty idea of rook takes c1 and then king takes e6, where white is now threatening the queen as pawn. Okay? Because some players will capture, like automatically capture. That's one of the old, one of the first things that you're taught in chess. Don't make automatic captures. Okay, so now Vachier Lagrave plays this move, attacking the rook. So now you have a double attack. Okay, attacking the bishop on c1 and the rook on f7. Now Rapport has to do something about that. Now he decides to play rook c7. Now of course, main idea, right? What happens on rook fe8? Because some of you are saying, hey, my idea is if rook c1, then I'll just play rook takes d8. Okay, and again, white would be better here. So you have to look a little deeper in the position. Here's the problem with rook f8, and this is why Richard did not play this. Look at these guys lined up together. So rook f1, just drop the rook, game over. So Vachier Lagrave, he saw all of this when he played the move rook d1 or move 45 here. He not only of course he saw the obvious threat of attacking the bishop, but he saw the sequence, the whole entire sequence and the variations that I pointed out to you. Because that's the only way you could justify this move. You have to see rook takes f7, and you have to see king d8, and you have to know that rook f8 is not possible because of rook f1 check. Just to give you an idea of the level that these guys are on and how far they're seeing ahead. This is why Richard played rook c7. Now again, he plays an in-between move, rook f1. Right? He didn't take right away. Why didn't he take? After rook takes e1, after rook takes c1, yes, black is winning. But e6, he starts pushing his pawn up. Okay? Now there's difficulties stopping the pawn. And Vachier Lagrave will probably have to give back the piece. So, for instance, rook f1, now there's this little hideout. You can come here. King g6. And let's see. Let's try e4. And let's just make a no move here. Let's say rook f2, e7, just for illustrative purposes, right? So now the knight is attacked and you're threatening here. How do you stop the pawn? Knight f7 check. King d5. Okay. That's the only move that'll really stop that from queening. But then you do that, initiating the pin. Okay. So black gets here with the king, but king e8, and this is actually a draw, a theoretical draw. So I'm not gonna get into it, but this is a drawn position with these two pawns double like this. Okay, so just to give you that understanding, this is why again Lagrave played bishop f1. Okay, because the king is forced to go to an inferior spot. Right, instead of having this move e6 and then tucking the king here, notice with the knight here, the knight guards this square, so the king doesn't have the option to go here. So the king only can go to either the G file or go back. So these are the little nuances, position. You see? So he goes here. But instead of the king being up here assisting this pawn, notice how this pawn still can't move because the knight goes there. So king e4, and now he takes the piece. Rook c8. Knight f7. Okay, rook c6. Now if e6, again, we run into that old fork. Again, bad pieces leave the combinations, available for the opponent. So he has to rook e6. The knight comes to h6. So now there's no way that Richard is getting that piece back. So e6. Knight gets here, ready to blockade. Fighting off the blockade, fighting against the blockade. And it's amazing, even at move 52, we still see the fight for dark squares. So now this square is being covered. And of course, there's a check. King e5. This time, this knight is protected. Right, so the knight, there's no tempo lost here. King's gonna join in, so now if e7, then the king can just drop in right here on f7. Okay, so now we have this attacked. This square is adequately guarded. And right here, Richard resigned. Okay, he saw no reason to continue playing. He's just down a piece. And possible continuation could be rook takes c5, rook takes e3 check, and say after king f4. Right, we don't thirstily grab that. We knock the king back a little further. Now we take, and just up a pawn, just up a piece in the pawn. So this is why Richard resigned. All right. Hope you liked that game. I hope it was very instructional for you. As usual, comments are welcome. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.